everybody. Welcome to another guest expert session of Healthy Deviant You. And tonight, as a special treat, we're broadcasting this into my general Healthy Deviant Facebook group as well. But, of course, my members are getting special treatment and having an opportunity to ask questions, be in the game, and generally enjoy the company of Steph Gaudreau. Steph, how are you?
I am well. Thanks for
I'm
having me.
I'm so glad that you are available to do this with me. And I am just really grateful to have your input and your expertise in this community because I'll tell you, this is a very enthusiastic group of health seekers. And like, check this out. We got Donna here tonight, excited to be here for a guest expert session. Rosie, who's just done it. Both, all of these people have made amazing changes and they're
Mm.
still excited to be here and learn new and exciting things, which makes me really happy. And they all love each other. They're constantly saying, good for you, you're doing great. Oh, Lynn, great to see you too. And Beth and Susan, oh my goodness, wonderful. So this evening, I'm particularly excited because I have had a long history with Steph as a friend and as a colleague and a collaborator. And truly, when it comes to healthy deviance, Steph, you've been preaching like from the same book as me for so long with a very different area of expertise. And I've learned so much from you. And that's a big part of what we do in Healthy Deviant You and in Healthy Deviant communities is emphasize the importance of continuous growth and learning. So you, for folks who are not aware, are one of the great teachers of our time in this realm around nutrition, around fitness, particularly strength training, around quality of life, wisdom, the wisdom required to be a healthy person in an unhealthy world. And I was really interested when I was looking at your bio, prepping for this. I almost didn't get through it because it was so you have so many certifications. You are so qualified in every way. And you've been doing this for long enough that you've really racked up. I mean, 3 best-selling books, or 4, is it 4 best-selling books now, right?
Three? I don't even
3, 4.
know.
I don't know. I've
Three.
lost track. I think but this core 4 has 4 in the title, which might have
Yes.
thrown me off.
Yeah. Yeah. 3 books.
But also cookbooks, like Stupid Easy Paleo, which is still just a great general book. People probably may or may not remember this one came out several years ago, but your podcast has had 4 million downloads. You're everywhere all the time doing everything. And in the past few years, what I've been seeing you focusing on is building a community of your own of, in particular, well, people, but women in particular, who are wanting to get stronger and healthier and finding themselves challenged to do that with
Mm.
the status quo counsel that they've gotten and not enough support, obviously. Describe for people who are not as familiar with your career, though, give us just like a couple minute tour of what you're passionate now, kind of how you came to this so people have context.
Absolutely. I appreciate all of the kind words too. And I've been such a fan of yours and just like so happy to know you for as many years as I have. I consider you a great friend and a mentor. And I just am so grateful for this opportunity. So it's funny that you mention education because education is a huge value of mine. I used to be a teacher. So I was a high school science teacher. Chemistry and biology primarily were the subjects that I taught, which 90% of people go, ooh, and then the 10% of the nerds out there think that's pretty cool. But I've always been really interested in science and understanding how things work, in particular in the human body. Always been fascinated. I was the kid at 14, 15 years old watching the Discovery Channel that showed the operation where they used to do live operations. And at that time, that was pretty strange on TV to see that, but have always been super fascinated with that. And so I was a high school teacher for 12 years. Kind of a parallel track at the same time was I've always been an athletic person, have always really loved sports and just challenging myself physically. And that's something that was hard for me at the same time because I never felt like I looked like the rest of the kids, or as an adult, I was really into mountain biking and cycling. And my body type, I didn't really see super represented. I was always trying to be thinner and smaller. And that really led me down the path of what I now know is things like low energy availability and eventually burnout because I was so exhausted and tired from all of the things I was doing and making a lot of mistakes. I found strength training in 2010 and it really rocked my whole entire world personally and then professionally. I found strength training and it was such a shift in how I saw myself, what I considered strength to be, and how I really felt like I could exist in this world and just be who I am. And at that same time, I wanted to share what I was learning about things like sports nutrition and weight training with other women, because it was still at 2010. I mean, there were women who were lifting, but it was still nothing like it's even today, 10, 12 years later. And I saw a lot of my peers struggling with a lot of the same things that I did, not knowing how to fuel my body, not knowing that strengthening my body was also important, not just the aerobic or endurance stuff that I was doing, because that was my sport before I came into lifting weights. So fast forward, I left the classroom in 2013, and I've been doing this work full time since then. I know I somehow have survived. And I was just talking to another friend, and we were talking about it's just being stubborn enough to not quit, quite frankly. So I know you can relate in a lot of ways, but
Yes.
now I have my podcast, which I've had since 2015.
What's the name of the podcast for folks who
It's
are
now
unfamiliar?
called Fuel Your Strength Podcast.
Fuel Your Strength. And
Fuel Your Strength
Tracy
Podcast.
can probably find a link to that, and we'll post it in the comments or chat
Yeah.
area so folks can grab it if they're interested.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic.
So
It's
the
good content.
podcast, which is I would say one of the longest continuous running fitness and nutrition podcasts, and now is specifically focused on women, particularly with an interest in women over 40, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Yeah. I've got, a kind of a signature coaching program, and I also work with people in terms of strength training. So I really feel like finally I have found what I am meant to do, and I just am so grateful that I get to show up and do that every day.
Well, I am grateful too. And, it's interesting. I listened to your story, and I so relate to all the different parts of it, but particularly that there's an instinct that you have, like, I want to do healthy things. I want to be active. I want to be strong. And then there's a sort of countervailing information or propaganda that comes at you, which is like, you don't get to go out and do these things. You don't get to go be strong or be sportive unless you look the way that the stock photography of those people doing those things in the magazines look. Unless you already have the physique that is associated with that sport or that activity, it's like you don't feel that you belong, or it's okay for you to do it. And of course, one thing I learned as a magazine editor is a lot of the times the people who are photographed for those articles, those magazine advertisements and things, they actually, in some cases, aren't even athletes. They're just models, or they're athletes who look a certain way that gets selected by photographers. It isn't necessarily even representative of the actual people who are doing the sport. But even if it is, the idea that you can only have a body type of that, the kind of classic runner body type, or classic biker or hiker body type, or climber body type, I think is so chilling to people who would like to try those things. And for me, every part of your story rings super familiar, scarily so. I undid probably 9, 10 different efforts in the beginning of my own health seeking, just by being afraid because of the messages I was getting. Not eating enough when I was trying to get strong, and then I couldn't get strong. Wanting to get thinner before I went to the gym because I didn't feel like my body looked right to be in the gym doing the thing. It's so stupid now when I think about it, but I think that these are attitudes that are pretty common in our culture still. So reteaching ourselves to think about it differently is really important. And, we talked about continuous growth and learning. It's phase 3 of the Healthy Deviant You program. But we save this. We don't get to the heavy duty learning part, like build new skills, bring in a bunch of new guest experts, typically until after people have done the first 2 phases. And the first phase is amplified awareness, which is like, notice what the hell is going on and what's working for and against you in our culture. Phase 1, start where you are. And then phase 2 is reclaim your mojo. And when I read your story, reclaim your mojo is really about reclaiming your confidence. It's reclaiming your basic energy and vitality. And I think one of the things I love so much about your programs is that you always start where people are. You don't tell them that they should go and pick up 500 pounds, or that they should, be someplace other than they are. It's like, where you are is cool. And if you're going to be trying to get strong, you're going to have to eat. Like, let me see your shirt. I just noticed this. You sell this up for me. Girls who eat. I love it.
This is not my shirt, but it is an athlete who is actually local here to San Diego, but she participated in the CrossFit Games. She's incredibly strong. She does have one of those body types that is not the norm for even CrossFit. She is so strong, but this is her message, which is if we want to do cool stuff, we're going to have to fuel for it. So I just really love the message that she's putting out there.
Susan really likes the shirt too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of these things I think conspire in my mind. Well, first of all, for anybody who missed it, Steph has an incredible podcast called Fuel Your Strength, and you can find it here at our website, stephgaudreau.com. And then Fuel Your Strength podcast. Also on all of the major podcast platforms, right? You can get it streaming almost anywhere. So if you already have a podcast platform, just dial up Fuel Your Strength. So one thing I want to talk about, we're titling this Healthy Deviant Strength. And I, in my Healthy Deviant work, make a pretty concerted effort to not promote any particular diet, any particular fitness regimen, any particular approach. I'm really like agnostic. And the one thing I will say that I am pretty straightforward about, like if you start either losing strength or failing to gain strength throughout your lifetime, it will put you at risk for 1,000 things you don't want to have happen. And it's really under leveraged in most of the fitness literature that you see conventionally. Like people give it kind of, they give it like passing, like, yeah, it's important to build strength and muscle, blah, blah, blah. But no one really, I don't think, takes it seriously. I don't think people learn how to do it well. And so every time they try, they tend to either get injured or it doesn't work out the way they plan. And they just go back to like walking and yoga, which is great. I mean, I do walking and yoga and I love it. But I'll tell you, I got really detrained over the past year when I stopped working with my previous trainer due to life issues in her world. And I just started training with you. And even in the first week, I'm feeling so much better in my body and so much stronger and so much more clarity about like what I need to be doing to build, train to train, and then build strength. So I would love to have you just talk a little bit about your perceptions of why strength in particular is important and why it's like, for me at least, healthy deviant strength means leaving behind a lot of the bull crap that we've been taught in this culture about what that looks like and feels like and how it shows up in our body minds. So give us your elevator pitch.
I'll give you my best. I'll give you my best. Okay. I think there are a lot of factors here, and I am someone who is kind of incapable of giving just a nice answer in a box because I see things from a lot of different perspectives and I have a lot of life experience and I've worked with a lot of people. I think fitness by and large is presented to us in the broader world, maybe not here inside your group, but I think fitness is presented in the larger world as just a way to fix your body of the parts you don't like or to make it more aesthetically pleasing. Maybe somebody has told you have to start exercising for your health and you were told by a doctor or something, hey, you have to start exercising. It wasn't really your idea. You're not really into it.
Totally.
Right? So we have these very extrinsic motivators that oftentimes bring people into fitness. And I think the way I see things is that might be a good, and the research agrees, by the way, that it might be a good reason or a good way to bring people into the conversation of fitness and exercise. But by and large is not the strongest point for people to maintain that over time. At some point, we have to shift our perspective a little bit more along that continuum. And it's not just extrinsic or intrinsic. There's a whole spectrum in between.
Yep.
But if we can shift a little bit more toward the type of motivators that touch on our identity or our values along the way, as we kind of soften into this, we kind of find why we like it. We find why it matters to us. If we get to intrinsic motivation with fitness and exercise, awesome. But those are really great stepping points along the way. So I think if we want exercise, fitness, working out, strength training to be part of our long-term, like for life, this is for life. It's not just something, and I think most people here would agree, it's not just something for the short term. It's something you want to keep going over time. It's something you want to develop. it's a practice. It's something that you want to be part of your life. Even if you're not into fitness as a career, you know why it matters. And so I think if you can start to develop that, if you're newer coming in, that's the piece that is oftentimes lacking. And especially when we look out into the wider world, fitness is for women, especially about fixing all the body parts that you find disgusting about yourself. Shame is not a great motivator for long-term change.
Say that again. That's like, I want a t-shirt that says that.
Shame is not a great motivator for long-term change. And that also comes out of the psychological research as well.
Yeah.
So
shame is a great way to get you to hide in your house. Shame is a great way to get you to do terribly self-destructive things every day. Shame is a great reason to stay distracted by pictures of other people whose bodies make you feel even crappier about yourself, rather than doing anything in the service of your own highest choice. Yeah.
It may even be enough to get you started, but it is not going to be enough to see you through to the end.
Yeah.
So I would just say that part, I think, is completely missing from the majority of conversations about exercise as a true health promoting habit. When it comes to strength training in particular, there is just a mountain of incorrect beliefs, things that aren't grounded in the science, ideas that we have that are perpetuated by media, by stereotype. For example, if we think about a weightlifter, most people tend to think about, I don't know, Hans and Franz from Saturday Night Live, or
it would pump you up.
It would pump you up, right? Or some guy who's got like his veins are bulging out of his head and the barbell is bending, and these more bodybuilder or strongman type of folks, which are definitely, I would say, still kind of on the fringes of our population, but we tend to have those ideas. And this goes back to that conversation about who do we see fitness is for, who do we see represented, who do we see in the imagery, and so on and so forth. So I think that we have to overcome some of that. When it comes to women over 40 in particular, like I said, a lot of times this is also dovetailing with wherever we are on the menopause transition, that menopause spectrum from perimenopause through postmenopause. The 1 day of menopause, of course, is that transitional change between the two, but then we'll live the rest of our lives postmenopausal. Yeah. And that could be up to 40% of your lifespan on average. So it's quite a large percentage of your life. This also coincides with, for a lot of people, with changes in their life that are really stressful, relationship status, career, maybe having to change jobs, family, shifting family dynamics. Maybe the kids are leaving the house if you have them, financial stress, aging family, and then your body's changing on top of it. And you're thinking, what in the hell is going on here? So
no wonder I'm feeling so freaked out.
It can be a really stressful time. And there's a lot of stuff shifting physiologically as well. But again, I think on the surface, even when I am making presentations in Canva, which is the sort of software that I use to make presentations, and they have this great bank of photos, and we were talking about stock photography earlier, or just models and things like of that nature. When I type in fit woman over 40, I get everyone in their much older years, right? And oftentimes the weights are tiny, 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 if there's any weights. And it's just that stereotype, right? Again, of if we're in a certain phase of life, lifting weights is dangerous. It's bad. We shouldn't do that. Or to your point, walking is we should just stick to very, very easy, very gentle things. They have a place. Love that. You've got yoga, you've got walking. All these things serve a purpose. But we know physiologically, if we do not apply stress to the body and cause the body to have to force an adaptation, and I'm talking about reasonable, right? We're not talking about overdoing things, but we challenge the body, we cause a stress to the body, we have to recover from that stress, we have to build new tissue, we're pulling and tugging on our bones, which is how they send that signal, the bone cells to grow. We then recover, we adapt, and that's how we get stronger, we build that tissue, we have to have some of that stress. And if we don't, then we begin to detrain.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the types of training, and we're talking about strength training, but there are a lot of other things that we kind of need to think about. We can get away with a lot more when we're younger, much to everyone's chagrin. Everybody hates that fact. We need a little bit more recovery. We need a little bit more patience with ourselves, shifting our own expectations often of how fast things will happen. But the wonderful part, the great news in all of this is that the body will respond.
Yay, body!
The body will respond if we give it the right stimulus to respond to.
Yeah.
So, yes, we hear the statistics that by age 30, we start to lose muscle. 3 to 8% per decade. That rate increases as we are approaching that menopause transition. And it continues for the rest of our life. And by the time we're 80, universe granted we are here that long, we might lose up to 1/3 of our muscle mass.
Yep.
And that has significant impacts on things such as clinical sarcopenia, which is loss of muscle mass, which also affects things like our body's ability to manage blood sugar, because muscle is this wonderful sink of glucose in our body. It affects our independence, activities of daily living, balance, our mitochondria. I mean, just it affects so many things. And also
libido is huge. I mean, so many people are taking drugs to like ramp up their libido or manage the outcomes of those things. And I'm just like, I just feel like they're so, and even like psycho-spiritually, you know, like how you feel about yourself in the world, whether you feel vulnerable to the onslaughts of the world or, you know, resilient and capable of bouncing back. It's psychologically so important, undoubtedly.
right.
Yeah. So a couple thing I wanted to just, I want you to keep going with your thing. I feel like I just want you to like put you on a pulpit and speak to the world about this. I'm thinking about this myth too. Like you were talking about these motivations. I think a lot of the time we have the idea that I'm going after the appearance. In order to achieve the appearance of fitness, I'm willing to do these exercises that will get me strong. And we were talking with like functional nutritionist Cindy Lockhart, who's another one of our visiting experts. And she said, you know, a lot of times people focus on getting thin and losing weight to get healthy because their doctor has told them you need to lose weight, rather than focusing on eating to get healthy and then finding that their metabolism, naturally, a microbiome and other things suddenly make it a million times easier for them to drop excess adipose tissue, to improve their body mass, to improve their metabolism, all of that. And I kind of like there's the same sort of reversal of like what we go after and what we focus on. It's really kind of reverse. Like it works so much better to focus on building strength and capacity and confidence in your body, and then allow the appearances, those things will take care of themselves, you know, including all the pieces you talked about, the measures and markers of bone density and body mass, you know, all of that stuff. But do you feel like, is this a missing piece in the, like with medical education? Is this a kind of abuse of media or a kind of crossed wire? Like, what is that about? Why is it we aren't getting more of the truth of all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think because if we kind of cast our mind's eye back several decades, we had this emergence of folks realizing that things like cardiovascular disease were on the rise. So then we had low fat diets, right? We had this shift in, you know, we saw studies coming out about why fat is the most terrible thing for us, and cholesterol, and right. It just, the
Amazing
science,
miseducation.
Right. The study, some of those studies were not well done. They were misinterpreted. The evidence was not fully presented. I mean, problematic to say the least. However, what you have is this trickle down effect. And so we had research influencing policy, and then policy influencing all sorts of things. And we would see it, for example, if we went into a grocery store and everything now is completely low in fat, but it's been replaced with a lot of sugar.
Yeah.
This is one example. I think those sorts of things get lodged in our minds as, for example, we just need to strip away as much adipose tissue as possible, for example. And truly, some I've worked with some people who would not, they're in they're healthy first and foremost by their blood markers and things of that nature. They're able to get around, but they're just not happy about wanting to lose this extra 2 or 3% body fat, and it is like a mission of theirs, and they are not happy until they get there, and they will do anything. And so quite often what we see, unfortunately, is we've seen a huge emphasis on subcutaneous fat, obviously visceral fat having more of that risk factor to chronic disease. So that's that deep abdominal fat that lines and protects our organs, but we don't want an excessive amount of that. And it can increase, especially in midlife. But we take that as out of the equation, and we're talking about just removing all subcutaneous fat, for example, which is what a lot of people really want to do. They come to me and they're like, I just want to get super, 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 super lean. Lean, just as lean as I can be, because then I'll be happy.
No,
but I also heard that, I need to be as lean as possible for my health. And I think that's one crossed wire.
Yeah.
Another one is in the misunderstanding, or I should say the nuance that occurs. If we were to talk about something like body recomposition and scale weight. So we know, this is evidence-based, we know now that if we have a too significant of a caloric deficit combined with a low protein intake and a lack of resistance training, most people would be stoked because they see the scale goes down.
Yeah.
If they're able to maintain this pretty aggressive caloric deficit. However, a significant portion of the mass lost when you look at the scale will be muscle mass for many, many people.
Yeah.
Now we've reduced our basal metabolic rate. We've made our metabolism a little bit less flexible in terms of being able to really just kind of go with the ebbs and flows of like a higher food intake, slightly lower food intake. Things just get progressively smaller in terms of what we can handle. We don't have any energy. Again, we're starting to lose more muscle mass on muscle mass, those sorts of things. Yeah. Bone mass as well. So bone and protein are significantly related there.
Yep.
So
and
I
gut
think
health, right? Like, I mean, our mutual friend, Jamie Scott, has written a lot about how, protein deficiencies can really mess with gut health. And then people have all sort of colitis, and they have, leaky gut and inflammation and skin problems. And it's like, hey, listen, remember, were you originally going into this to get healthier? Because this isn't really paying off that way. Yeah.
So I think we have a lot of things that have been lost in our vigor to communicate things simply. And for example, in a heuristic that a broad population of people could understand, for example, eat less, move more. That means a lot of different things. And so, yes, if you're very sedentary, moving more is probably a great idea.
Yeah.
If you're over consuming food or over consuming certain types of foods at the expense of others, yeah, we may need to bring that into better balance, 100%. But that unfortunately has become the mantra at all costs. It has led to people misunderstanding the nuances of, for example, you could gain muscle mass. You may also lose some adipose tissue, and the scale might not budge at all. But we've been taught, we've been steeped in this culture of the scale is so important. The scale tells us everything, and it also tells us our self-worth. Yeah. And that's where we get really wrapped up in those sorts of things. So it's really complicated, really, really complicated. But I think we have to start having some of these messier conversations and more nuanced conversations for folks to go, oh, okay, well, now I can apply this. And looking at things like health markers, looking at muscle mass as indicators beyond just the scale weight, important indicators in terms of somebody's well-being, their quality of life, their independence, their health span, not just the lifespan.
Well, I think too about how often I've had this experience as I've gone in and out of different phases of my life of, like dreading signing myself up for a kind of like, I need to get back into shape thing. And then being like, oh my God, I just don't like the sound of any of this. This sounds like, oh God, and then if I didn't see immediate results again, I would discourage. But there would usually be this point where oftentimes, even just after like a week or 2 weeks of doing it, I would suddenly start experiencing the intrinsic rewards and feeling different in my body in ways that made me care so much less about the calipers and the scale and even the shape of my body. It no longer mattered as much because suddenly I'm like, I feel so much better. Like, I mean, I feel bounce in my step. I feel energy returning. I feel a kind of, and then we haven't really been talked about this, but so many people think about strength training is just about muscle. I mean, just the muscle effect, but there's such an incredible hormonal response and such an amazing neurotransmitter response for mood issues. I mean, I've told so many people this, but like, yes, antidepressants can be super helpful. And please, and also, or maybe first, try some of these other interventions because boy, the science is pretty solid on the impact of this kind of training on not just the body, but the body mind. So
100%.
yeah.
Self-efficacy, yes. 2016 and 2017, there were also two meta-analyses and systematic reviews that came out. One was looking at the effect of strength training, not just exercise in general, because we have this understanding, I think, pretty innately, and also a lot of studies that movement can be so positive for your mood. I mean, even getting outside and taking a walk, right? We know that. But specifically strength training, resistance training, what is the effect? 2016, 2017, one was on anxiety. The other one was on mild depression. And in both systematic reviews and meta-analyses were able to show that resistance training has a positive outcome on both of those. I know it's common for people to say that lifting is therapy. I like to say it's therapeutic. I don't think it's a substitute for every type of therapy that could be necessary for someone's well-being, but it can be very, very therapeutic. And again, what we might call colloquially confidence is really that self-efficacy, that sense that you can do challenging things, that you have that agency, that you're able to follow through and make things happen. And is just, you can't, I don't think you can fully explain it until you experience what it's like, even to the degree where people will say, and I just had one of my lifters say the other day, it was an exercise that I've programmed 100 times. And for some reason, for this person, that exercise was something she didn't think she could ever do. We're not even talking about a pull-up. This is something that's, levels kind of scaled or regressed down from a pull-up, but working toward one. And she just said and left a note, I never thought I would be able to do this. And I also had that experience fairly early on where I never thought I could be strong. I never thought I could do a pull-up. I never could do push-ups. I just never thought strength was really for me. And when you first start to get that sense of like, if I've been believing that, and that's not necessarily true, what else have I been believing? And I can see where I can go with that. I don't think that proving things and doing things is the only way to shift how you feel about yourself. And I certainly don't want to turn strength training into someone else's, well, I'm only going to feel worthy if I feel skinny. I don't want to turn it into, I'm only going to feel worthy if I can squat this much weight or do a pull-up. We don't want to substitute one type of self-worth for another. That's your self-worth is unconditional, no matter what you can do.
Yeah.
But it can be a very, very powerful stepping stone. And just a really illuminating experience, especially for those of us who believed we could never be strong.
Yeah. And that's something too, I think particularly, I think in the age groups that we're talking about, like, if we talk about women over 40, I think, like, I'm 56, and I remember most of my life growing up, I didn't play sports. Wasn't in schools where there was a lot of physical phy ed opportunities or whatever. So I was a pretty strong kid from growing up on a farm. I was reasonably active, but I think a lot of men have had the experience of training for sports or getting into the gym with guys or competing with each other who can do the most pull-ups or push-ups. It's really it's an accepted part of male identity to get strong or to be big or to build muscle, and that's like, and I think for women, who are now, particularly if you haven't had this experience in your teens and 20s and 30s, to be going into this fresh or new or like not even understanding what it might feel like in your body can be really disconcerting. And I think we're talking about all the positive impacts right now. But I wrote a piece many years ago, or I guess we did a piece in Experience Life magazine called like Your Body Reframed. And it was also about like how disconcerting it can be as your body starts to change. Oftentimes it will be getting both stronger, potentially parts of it getting bigger, parts of it getting smaller, leaner, just a different, like, I don't know what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for some people that is exhilarating. And I think for other people, it's like, you talked about identity. It's an identity shift that they weren't anticipating. And it's really worth, I think, talking about that. Identity is a big part of Healthy Deviance too. Like getting into that, the fourth phase of Healthy Deviant You is be the change. And this is all about like stepping into your Healthy Deviant identity and building Healthy Deviant community that shares your values so that you're not the only one weirdo trying to do all of this stuff. And I think that's another piece of your work that's really valuable is you're gathering folks and educating them and encouraging them. And I think that there's a kind of consolidation of density of community of people who are like, yes, that sounds right to me. Yes, that's my experience. And people are then amplifying that for each other. So they're not, you're not a voice in the wilderness, or you're not a person trying to do it all by yourself anymore. I want to go back a little bit to the eating thing too, because I do think that oftentimes the diet and exercise message that we've been given, move less, eat less, move more, or just eat healthy, and the quote marks around the healthy have to do with the fact that there's a lot of debate about what that looks like, and particularly with the diet culture that we've been living in. There was a person who wrote a letter into me after I was talking about Healthy Deviant You a few weeks ago. And she was saying that she's always been overweight. She's always been fat shamed for it. Mm-hmm. And even she has built up a really strong defense mechanism around even the word health or healthy, because she associates it so strongly with code for get skinnier, lose weight, be a certain way, practice a certain kind of lifestyle that is inaccessible or not hers. And I wonder if you could just outline for me some of the ways that you think about healthy eating that are different than the conventional messages that we've gotten around that, particularly as regards eating when you're trying to get healthier and more fit, like training, exercise, fitness, nutrition, basically.
Yeah, this is there's so many hot button topics even within this concept. And I would think about it, or encourage people to think about it in terms of the way diet culture has informed what we think about as healthy eating, because there were definitely trends that, again, came up with us as we were growing up that really stuck and that ultimately weren't healthy. Yeah. We have a emotional, psychological component of food and eating and those pieces in food psychology. We also have this element of the components of food and what they do for our body. We have food as a socio-cultural phenomenon. We have our heritage, our ethnicity, our culture, our traditions, depending on where in the world we grew up, how we connect with family. It is so complex. And so to boil food down into only the calories that it has is missing a massive point. Yeah. So I think I would encourage people to define for themselves, what role food plays in their lives, and also understand that for some people, depending on your lived experience, how you show up in the world, you may have pieces of your experience that don't mirror other people. And also saying, if there are those tender parts of you, it's worth getting help for, because it can feel so isolating to think, I've really just developed this really restrictive, narrow, small definition of what food is and how it fits into my life. For me, when I'm working with people, and I my whole platform is about fueling well, but I also acknowledge for people, food isn't just fuel. So we don't want to make it singular in that way. But when I'm talking with people, I am forever trying to get people to take an inclusive view of food insofar as what are foods that I'm currently not consuming that would actually support my energy, that would support my muscle mass, that would support the goals that I have, but also what is food that I want to include because I enjoy the tastes. I enjoy the experiences it brings to my life, and it's meaningful. It is representative of my culture. And in the Western world, we do a really good job of saying that people's traditional or ethnic foods, for example, are unhealthy.
Right.
Or off limits and unhealthy for all. And it's, wow, how narrow minded and terrible to say, hey, this is a food you shouldn't eat when it's literally the staple of your culture. So I think we have to broaden the definition of what we mean by that and think about those boxes. In other words, not that we want to put food into a box, but am I thinking about food in this really holistic way rather than boiling everything down into its caloric content or how much fat grams it has? Certainly, if we have goals, like we realize we're going to do some strength training, we need to probably increase our protein a little bit, thinking about those things, but also remembering, and this is something I feel very strongly about. I don't believe that counting macronutrients or counting calories is the be all end all, and you have got to do this or you're never going to reach your goals. I teach my students multiple different ways of approaching things depending on what is comfortable and accessible for them. And I do have a lot of clients and students who come in and they're like, girl, I've done all the dieting. Like, is there another way for me to develop awareness of what's coming in?
Yeah.
So I can make a change if necessary without it feeling restrictive, without it feeling like I'm losing out on social situations or I'm feeling anxious about things and I feel like I can't include any foods that I find tasty. I'm eating diet food, basically.
Rabbit food.
Yeah, rabbit food.
Yeah.
Rabbit food. So, I think part of that is informed by my work and going through the intuitive eating certification. And I really do find it extremely helpful to help people access those pieces of, how food has that emotional component, how food has that psychological component. Food also does things to our body, and we should know what those basics are. For example, why do women in menopause need more fiber? We really need to be aware of fiber intake. One of the number one reasons is because as estrogen declines and estrogen receptors decline in the gut, our gut muscles, our smooth muscle that moves things along, become a little bit less active, which can lead to an increase in constipation. Straining is one very common reason why urogenitary symptoms can increase in women in menopause. And that can cause everything from prolapse to just irritation of existing symptomology.
Yeah.
Gut health, that piece as well, of course, in feeding the microbiome. We know from fibers, there could potentially be that cardiovascular cholesterol component to it as well, blood sugar, just helping us feel fuller longer. So, there are ways to look at nutrition in a technical way, but from a more neutral perspective, and not turning everything into a diet.
Yeah.
Well, I need to do this because of a diet, or I need to do this because it's going to result in me, again, like the scale has to go down or I'm not going to be happy. Are we providing our bodies with, the right nutrients? Are we also finding the process enjoyable? Because the things that we do and the shifts that we make, if we find them sustainable, we will keep doing them. I'm willing to bet that most people in your community have at some point done a very drastic type of diet, which was not sustainable.
Yeah. 100%.
And it feels lousy. you feel lousy, you have no energy, you don't want to do anything. So we have got to kind of come out of that vicious cycle. And it does take time. It takes education and a willingness to say, it is a bit of a deviant thing to say, what am I going to include, not what am I going to exclude?
100%. Well, it's funny you should mention the vicious cycle because we talk a lot about the healthy, deviant, virtuous cycle being a kind of antidote to the vicious cycle of what I call the unhealthy default reality. And the gist of the unhealthy default reality's vicious circle is a setup for failure, basically automatic default choices, and you're being programmed and brainwashed into thinking you're supposed to live a certain way, do a certain way, look a certain way. And then it's like the setup of that try-fail cycle of like, well, I better look for the solutions. Oh, well, the unhealthy default reality presents you with a solution. This workout, this regimen, this diet, you try that, it's miserable, it fails, you feel bad about yourself. And the ultimate swing of that cycle as you go around is to get to a place of being victimized, feeling so badly and overwhelmed that you give up and just become more vulnerable to the next automatic default suggestion that the unhealthy default reality has to give you. And when I got the letter from the person who was saying, listen, I'm kind of circling the drain here. I want to believe it's possible for me to get healthy. I believe there has to be a better way, but also so depleted and so depressed and so bummed out and so ashamed that getting yourself out of that space is, I always say, it's like the very first step is being aware that you're in the hole. Like when you become aware, like you just don't want to live this way, that the way you're doing sucks, that it's not paying off. Then the next step is like, reclaim your mojo before you attempt to become a super, cyclist or win a competition of some kind or like lose 500 pounds in 5 minutes. Like just get your basic mojo back. And when I read your counsel, both on nutrition and on fitness, which go together, like body, mind, fitness and nutrition really are, you kind of need both. They go together. That's what I see is like, let's get you to a place where you have confidence in yourself, where you are being nourished enough to make sensible decisions, where the basic machinery and systems of your body are working again. You're pooping, you're sleeping,
Yes,
you're
important.
digesting, you're gratified, you're eating and liking eating, and then you're building more skills, about, more things that you could cook, eat, choose, trying some new things, raising your game from a fitness level by challenging yourself more. But doing the challenging thing without the support is just a setup for more of that vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So I know there are some people who are just they're loving what you're saying. I've got yes, yes, yeses, and amens, and absolutelys. And I also know, this is a great note from Ruzi. She said, at almost 70, I desire strength that will allow me to not just continue functioning, but to be able to get up off the floor if I happen to fall. My mom lost so much of her strength that at 82, she was no longer to get herself up if she fell.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a motivation. Stephanie Davis says, I don't do diets with my functional medicine patients anymore. Haven't for 5 or so years. That's encouraging. That's interesting that a lot of those, I know those functional medicine protocols and functional nutrition protocols are often really well intended, and they're often very scientifically soundly based, but they don't really take into consideration some of the elements that we've talked about. And remember, a guy I really admire, David Ludwig, the physician at Harvard, who's written a lot about how wrong we've gotten saturated fats and cholesterol and all of that. And, has basically said, like, we have to remember that satisfaction in eating and psychological safety around eating are really important parts. You can't test it in a lab because we've, basically either intubated these people and forced them to feed this. And now we said it's a feeding study, so it's legit. But we didn't give them any choices, and we didn't monitor how they were feeling about what they ate. They lost weight on this diet, but it doesn't translate to the real world. So what's the point? It's not sustainable. Sorry, go ahead. I'll let you respond.
I was going to say, well, efficacy and effectiveness are not the same thing.
Say more. Let people know that. That's good.
So yes, scientific studies are important. Of course, quality in study design and being able to then pool together high quality studies of a similar topic and look for commonalities between them, which we would call systematic review, meta-analysis, is very important. Science moves us forward in our understanding 100%, yes. However, bringing a group of patients or a group of study, I shouldn't call them patients, bringing a study group to a lab and doing a controlled feeding study is not the same thing as somebody living freely out in the real world and free eating. So we can draw conclusions, we can, perhaps make correlations, of course, but it is not the same as living out in the world where you have a different environment. An environment is huge in influencing what we do and don't do. Our thought process there, is it something sustainable? If they did it for 4 weeks or 2 weeks, that's great, but can you do it for a year or 2 years? So efficacy is not the same thing as effectiveness. And so I just wanted to make that point for people. So we have to consider that we are a whole person. And I think this kind of goes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. One of my clients I was just talking to tonight was mentioning all the different things that we talk about. And I said, right, because you're a whole person. So we're not just talking about what protein does in your body. And I'm certainly happy to have that conversation with you. But we have to really get to the heart of what makes you tick. What do you keep getting hung up on? What change are you willing to make, and how do we get you there? What things do you prefer? What are you ready for? And all of that is what we do in coaching. So I think that's just an important thing to note. And I also wanted to talk about Rosie's comment there that, Rosie, that's so huge, that to have that strong why and why it matters to you to build strength. And that goes back to kind of earlier what we talked about with values, identity, and even intrinsic motivators for wanting to build your strength. Yeah. And having that experience and having, frankly, to witness that and to see what happened with your mom. There's something like 14 million falls per year are reported to the CDC. And that was in 2020. I think that statistic came from. So in older adults, 1 out of every 4 is that average will fall. And of course, we know with bone density and bone strength declining as we age through, again, we see a sharp drop off at the menopause transition. So we start to lose bone a little bit gradually. Then we have a really sharp decline, and then we have a more gradual decline as we go through. But fall is heavily influenced, as you mentioned, by things like strength and also balance. The US exercise guidelines for 65 and over are only different insofar as they recommend balance training weekly. I would love to see that. And I have my clients do balance training as soon as they can, as soon as possible. So the sit to stand test is a super good indicator of your progress there. And that's something that you can do at home and also scale depending on your strength level and ability to rise off the floor without using your hands or any other body part to assist you in doing so. It's something you could scale over time and build the strength to start rising from the ground. And this is stuff that I do also with my clients, is moving around on the ground, but also getting up from the ground, and how that's such a fundamental skill. And it can be very much associated with things like longevity and quality of life.
That's such an important point. And it's interesting, you're talking about we all have a weight called the body to move around in space with, and that's like a really good starting place. But it's interesting. So Rosie asked the question based on exactly what we're talking about. What would you consider the ideal weight for strength training? Like, I presume she's talking about like moving weights. I was always taught too much weight would make you look like a man from that generation. And I know we've talked about this as a kind of the worst fear. What could be worse than getting, like looking like a man? That would be like, because we get it. So how do you respond to that?
Yes, I would ask some questions. I would get a little bit curious first. Like, what does looking like a man look like? And in all seriousness, to someone, they might say, oh, well, my legs look too big, or my arms look too big, or I can't fit into my shirts, or I look like a particular well-known person, an actor or something. So if you tell me I don't want to look like The Rock, right. Saint Dwayne Johnson. I don't want to look like The Rock. I'm going to say, okay, well, I totally understand how that would be really off-putting if you didn't want to look like that. But then I would also kind of ask the person if they were open to hearing a little bit more in terms of, well, hormonally, if we have female hormones, we do not have the testosterone that a male would have in order to have that bigger capacity to build muscle tissue. I'd also, wonder if this person wanted to hear more about the aging process and actually how it becomes even harder to build muscle tissue. Not impossible, but sometimes I think we see people on, like on TV, maybe we saw a bodybuilding competition and or the Olympia, which is a very famous bodybuilding competition, where frankly at the Olympia, people are taking performance enhancing drugs and anabolic steroids. So to look like that is going to require a level of training, nutrition, and pharmaceutical intervention that none of us is going to probably do. Um, so I would kind of like ask some questions first, and then if the person wanted to hear a little bit more about some of the facts, because it's important to have some of those facts.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about training at weights that are challenging for you weights, so when we say heavy weights, we mean challenging or heavy for you now.
Yeah.
And everybody's level is going to be different, especially if we're training for strength. So strength and muscle mass are related, but not the same thing. In order to build muscle mass, we have to get the muscle fibers to do something we call hypertrophy, which is to grow. And generally speaking, is going to be a certain amount of reps and sets. And it's generally moderate weight, moderate reps, moderate sets. If we're training for strength, we're going to be lifting generally higher weights, but for fewer repetitions. And what we're really looking at is the ability of our muscle to create and generate force. Mm-hmm. So quite often, if we were to kind of go to the other end of the spectrum and look at in the Olympics, there's a sport called Olympic weightlifting. There are some very, very tiny weight classes, especially for females in the Olympics for Olympic weightlifting. I'm talking, these are 49 kilogram lifters, just over 100 pounds. Wow. The weights they lift are tremendous, yet they are very small because they have trained their bodies to move heavy weights, but also move them quickly. But you can see they're not doing the type of hypertrophy training that would make them look like a bodybuilder that's going to go on stage. So actually, as we lift heavier weights for fewer repetitions to really challenge our muscle for strength, which we need as we're over 40, and it's harder for us to build muscle because we're losing the signal of estrogen, it's extremely hard to look like you're going to get very, very, very large musculature.
Yeah, and this is like one of the most commonly asked questions. I'm really glad Rosie asked it.
Yeah, it's a good question.
It's something that I just feel like comes up, or people are afraid to ask it, mm-hmm. And I think the other thing someone told me this, I don't know, back when I was like maybe in my 30s when I was working on the magazine, and the question came up, and her actually kind of a cheeky answer, which is like, why don't you start lifting weights? And when you start feeling like you're looking too much like a man, come talk to me and we'll adjust your program. Because, the truth is, for the first few months that people are training, they're kind of like training to train and learning how to move weight safely. And mm-hmm. then comes the feeling of like, oh my God, I have actually some sore muscles, or oh my God, I'm getting stronger. And what 99% of the time, what she said happens is that people go, I look good. I look really good.
I like this.
I like this. And, you know, she said there was one person who came back after, I don't know, however many months, and it was their impression, and it was her impression that they had dysmorphia. But, I think that's a pretty good argument. Like, with all the benefits that come from getting stronger and doing strength training, and the likelihood that your fear of it's going to be getting big or bulky is unfounded, why not experiment, see what happens, do it until you don't like it anymore. That's a safer bet. Rosie says, thank you. That was exactly what I needed.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I had a question. Yeah, thank you for that good answer. Can resistance bands work along with weight training?
Yes. So especially when you're starting out and you're newer, body weight is an entry point. Resistance bands are an entry point. They're also super convenient because you can take them anywhere. They weigh almost nothing. They're very inexpensive, and they provide some resistance. So you might find, especially when you're starting. Now, body weight exercises are an interesting category because for the lower body, you're going to probably eventually, if you start with body weight, you'll find that you start needing a little bit more to challenge the muscles. Our lower body muscles are big. our quads, our glutes, our hamstrings. We need to load that. They're carrying literally the rest of our body around all day, right? So they're much bigger and stronger. You may start with body weight on those and eventually kind of run out of some runway to keep getting stronger, even if you do more challenging variations. The upper body is a little bit more interesting. We can often change the leverage points to make the exercises more challenging. But I tend to find that some people, they'll just naturally want more variations. They want to explore different exercises. So resistance bands can be a pretty decent next step or something to do along with body weight. But again, over time, you might find that you just need a little bit more. Now, you can get bands of different thicknesses. Absolutely. You can layer bands together depending on the exercise to increase the resistance there. But over time, you may also find that you need a little bit more challenge. Maybe you really want to add in, for example, the stability component that comes in with using something like a dumbbell, because that weight is now free and we have to work a little bit harder. We're challenging our stabilizer muscles in a different way. But if we're talking about starting out and just a way to do things simply, it's a great way to start. We just want to watch out for, just like any other kind of training, that we're progressing over time.
That's wonderful. Well, speaking of progressing over time, I know that we have a time limit on this. So I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about some of the ways that you work with people. And also, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the fact that you have a free master class coming up, which is super cool and might be a fun way for people to connect with you, get a sense of your style, understand some of the fundamentals that we're talking about tonight, but more directly in terms of counsel for them. Will you talk a little bit about that and also what your other programs and offerings are?
Sure. I would love to. Thanks. The masterclass, we're going to be talking about trends, and not in the way you probably think. So every year there's stuff that comes out in the fitness and nutrition space that gets really trendy and popular. And while it might be applicable to certain parts of the population, is it always a great match for active women, particularly over 40? So in that masterclass, we're going to be spotlighting some trends that have come up in this year and recent years, talk a little bit about the science, about why this might not be a great fit for us if we're trying to build strength, build muscle, improve our fitness over 40, and sort of what we can focus on instead, so that you can start right. I don't want you to wait until 2024, by the way, to, like, if you learn something from this masterclass and you think, I need this, I need to start doing this, and I'm right. I want you to start making a change ASAP. Everybody always thinks it's November, well, I'll just wait till 2024. Do it now. Now is the best. Now is the best time. It could be something super simple, right? Maybe you start going for a daily walk. I don't know. It could be anything, but that's what we're going to be talking about on the masterclass, is sort of taking a bit of a look down memory lane, by the way, which is how we got here and why there's so much conflicting information, and almost sort of how to be a little bit more, how to develop that media literacy, so that when you're online and you're looking at things, you don't just get lost like a deer in the headlights. You can think, oh, as someone who's trying to build muscle, that's probably not actually for me. Or somebody who needs to build strength, I probably need to be eating more than 800 calories a day. It just start to develop some better filters as you're searching social media. So that's the masterclass. And then in terms of working with me, I mean, my primary offers currently are my flagship program, which is where we take all of the main components to help women over 40 build strength, add muscle, perform better in the gym. But frankly, we're looking at outside the gym. How well do you feel? How much are you able to really get in there and enjoy life and do the things that you want to do? And that's really with my signature Fuel Your Strength framework. So that program is called Strength Nutrition Unlocked. We've got everything. We've got modules, you've got homeworks, you go out and apply it, because we want you to apply what you learn. Come back, get coaching on it, have a community. I mean, all the things that we know are really best practices for helping you be successful and make great change. The other options that I have are some of my lifting programs. So if you have a little bit more experience, like let's say 3 months, I've got an example there of a program that you can check out. That one's called Strong with Steph, and that one's actually the program Pilar is doing currently. And then And then the other would be my dynamic dumbbells program, which is really better suited for beginners and does start with a combination of body weight and band work to ease you in. So both of those options are available. And those are the main ways that one can work with me.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I am really enjoying the program that I'm doing with you. I'm just a few days in, but I really it's reminding me of why it is so important to choose good teachers, first of all. Like, there's a million people schlepping online courses and pitching programs. And, I really feel like you said media literacy, and I think all of it is like consumer literacy.
Mm.
Like, it's so tricky in the world of unhealthy default reality, a million choices coming at you all the time. One of the reasons I do these guest expert interviews is that I want to try to elevate and highlight and streamline for people how to find sensible, intelligent people who also share healthy deviant values and wisdom. Because without that, you just become a sitting duck for offer after offer after offer, some of which might be great, some of which are not so good. But I really like the way that you've packaged stuff up to stuff so people can have taste tests of free things from your website and your podcast and your YouTube channel, where you've got a ton of things that people can learn basics from. And then these programs that are really more surrounding people with support, moving them through a process, so they don't get lost in the wilderness of the unhealthy default reality. So I guess I'll just wrap with you by saying thank you for doing the work that I know has been decades in the making, a full decade since you left the teaching, and you were working on this stuff before, but like this is your
Yeah.
gig now. Thank you for having the courage to be a healthy deviant and spread the healthy
Thank
deviant
you.
message. And thanks for being part of my world too. I'm going to encourage folks to be in touch with you if and when they need more counsel.
Mhm.
And also, oh, look at this. We've got some nice Beth says, I did the strength nutrition course with Steph and highly recommend it. I encourage others to look into the masterclass and her website, courses, and podcasts. Top notch. Right on. That's
Thanks, Beth.
great, Beth. Thank you.
That's really sweet.
Donna says she's already registered for the masterclass, which is fantastic. And yes, oh, this is great. Oh, you guys, this is so cute. All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate everybody. Oh, wait, Donna had a question. What is the name of the 90-day course?
The 90-day lifting program. So it's 3 to 4 months. If you do the month at the beginning, which is the bands and body weight to ease in. So it's 4 months. And that one's called Dynamic Dumbbells. And that's on my website.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
There it is.
I also have a little taste tester sampler for anybody who wants to see generally what the style is, get some more information, like what is progressive overload, how do we gauge your intensity. That's available. And of course, you mentioned the podcast earlier. If you want to nerd out and just go listen to all the things and gather more evidence-based information instead of all of the junk that's out there, then we have so many episodes you can check out in different topics as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Everyone is saying thank you, and I'm adding my thanks. And thanks to Tracy, always behind the scenes, helping to gather up handy links and more. And hope we'll get to do more things together, Steph. It's just been really fun, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Healthy Deviants Unite.